Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. I know this are very trying times, and this is especially hard for all the core peoples. And I hope that all of you are staying safe in your homes and any place that you are finding your social distancing and everything right now. And I know within universities, your support systems, everything. It might seem that it's going very bad, but I really hope everything gets better soon. And that's why Ashoka University, I am a member of AUQC or the Ashoka University Core Collective, and that's why we have started this Trans Talk series. We celebrated the Trans Day of Visibility on March 31st, and we decided to hold a live series featuring all trans activists. So, yeah, I'm really grateful that you joined us today. And just a brighter side of shifting to this online is has given us this opportunity to make our all the events accessible beyond the campus so that we can invite co-collectors from across India to come and join us. And I think the biggest reason which you might have joined this new co-collective today, and our very first speaker is Ray. Ray is a trans women activist. She is pursuing LLB from campus of Law Center, University of Delhi. She often speaks on Transgender Persons Act and on the need for gender-neutral washrooms in public spaces. This talk is going to be fully interactive, and so we want you to post your questions, post your doubts on the chat, and you have our email over there. So just keep interacting, and without further delay, I will uh, hand over the mic metaphorically to Ray. So please invite Ray. Yeah.
Uh, Thank you, AU Collective, for having me here. First of all, we are going to today talk. The topic of the session is law, gates, and our lives. And I would like to take a few seconds to reflect on why. Is because law, in a certain way, if you want to define what is law and what is the function of law, usually it's the easiest definition that emerges is to regulate our lives and bring about social order. So then when we try to bring about social order and control, using by giving authority there to certain persons and certain institutions within a certain framework, then there is a certain kind of bias based on human prejudices that is naturally going to build up. But law is also going to do something while trying to control and regulate people, which is by imposing something called gates. And I mean, you can see it in different ways. You can call it a passport system, you can call it a gate system, you can call it boundaries. But there are always going to be some kind of boundaries. So institutions are going to be built on a certain amount of invisibilized violence, and violence not as in the physical violence, but violence as in keeping someone out and keeping taking someone in. That's always going to be there. And that is why, and the last part of the title, which is our lives, is exactly why I want to emphasize in this session. And this session is roughly going to be about for 40 minutes, after which I can take questions. And if you want to join in, there will be the email ID that is given in the description of this YouTube live. So you can join in. You can just ping there on the mail and you can join in. You can have a face-to-face conversation if you want. This session topic is quite broad. So I'm going to focus specifically on what I know, which is on gender identities and on transgender persons, especially in the context of a recent legislation that was passed in 2019 called the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. Um, it was passed by the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, and now it's awaiting the notification of its rules. And I'm a law student, so at any point, if this gets really boring, or if this gets really like very bland, you can always put a comment, and I'll know that. So let's begin. I'm going to try and share a a set of slides. Um, one sec. Yeah, yeah, here it goes. So if you can look at your screen, I've just like put up a set of, you know just slides. It's not it doesn't have much content. The main content is going to be me speaking. um, the idea, some of the basics here before I jump into the judgments, is what is a transgender person. Now you might all have certain questions, certain assumptions. We all have something that we already have learned about certain identities, individual and social. Most often using the the visualization of a certain trans person or a hijra person on the street begging, and these words are themselves like something that you hear from outside, but the visual is something that many people the visual or the sound is something that people might always know. And that is why I want you to understand is first that this question, let's start with the question. If a child is born, for example, if a baby is born, how is a gynecologist or a doctor who is assisting in the pregnancy, or anyone who's assisting in the pregnancy, is going to decide the sex of the child? How does that happen? Usually, if I ask this question in most lectures, everyone just talks about how the doctor. I mean, you just have a minute, right? The doctor just has a minute or 2 minutes. They don't have an entire lifetime to decide the gender of the child. So the doctor generally looks at the genitalia and classifies a child into already social understandings of, say, if this genitalia is present on a child, then it's a male child, and if this genitalia is present on a child, it's a female child. That's usually the understanding that happens. And the gender slash sex is mentioned, as which I would call in this session sex assigned at birth. Now, why is this important? The way I framed this example is why it is important. It's because to make you realize that there is something called as an ontological reality, a reality which is outside human bias, and there is a reality which is inside human minds. And that reality is not exactly, I'm not saying that's wrong, but we are going to construct based on certain things, certain patterns in our heads, and we are going to classify and categorize, because that gives us comfort, that helps us understand things better, and that helps us classify and give us a sense of safety and security. Which is why, say, a child with a penis and a child with a vagina is classified as quote unquote male or quote unquote female, is assigned. Why am I saying this? Is because often people say that it's a biological fact. And people stop understanding that biological facts are not necessarily always facts. They are also built on human understanding of a certain and want to create a certain category. So the child is born, the child later grows up, comes up to teenage, or later becomes a young adult, and the child decides that, or even gets married, becomes an old person. But then the person decides, the adult decides that, okay, maybe this genitals, the world calls me this, but I may not completely relate with this. I don't relate with this. I'm sorry. I don't fit into this category. I don't feel like I belong in this category. That's one way of putting what is a transgender person. A transgender person is simply whose gender identity does not uh, always correspond or match with the sex assigned at birth. Now, why is this important? It's important precisely because we must realize that um, we the distinction between sex and gender is not just of imposing a certain role based on the sex category that is assigned at birth, but but also has real impacts And I mean, scientists have been trying to research about it. There are different theories. We can go on and on about it. But this is the long and short of it. Um, and transgender persons are not necessarily the same as intersex persons. That I want to clarify first. Intersex persons are those persons whose variations based on characteristics, genitalia, hormones, are chromosomes, do not necessarily fit into the, again, the categories that were assigned at birth are the categories that we normatively understand usually. Typically we say in biology we say XX is a male, is a female child, and XY is a male child. But there are persons whose chromosomes may not necessarily fit into these binaries of XX and XY, and so we say they are intersex persons. And we must understand that at sex assigned at birth, our sex based on certain characteristics at birth can be male, female, intersex. That is one layer. Then transgender person, gender identity is who you are. On the categories of gender, if you put a multiple choice question, or you say that you don't want a multiple choice question, you are beyond that, you are saying in that category of gender, where does a person want to belong, irrespective of where they were assigned or what the society or what everyone assumes about them, based on their appearance, based on what they have on their legal documents, based on medical criteria, etc., etc. So intersex persons may also identify as transgender persons, but all intersex persons, just as all men and all women, all cis men and all cis women, need not necessarily identify as transgender persons. Also, one more, this thing is two, three other words before I proceed on, is about gender non-conforming expression. Basically, expression which doesn't conform with social roles assigned to a sex. So a man is supposed to wear a shirt and a pant, and a woman is supposed to wear a sari, based on in that socio-cultural context, in that particular time period, the person doesn't conform to those normative ideas of how he or she or they should conform. Then that's a gender non-conforming expression. That's the idea. A long talk on this, but having cleared that, one of the important judgments that we all should understand, irrespective of whether we are law students or not, is the NALSA versus Union of India 2014 judgment. Now, why is that important? Because when the entire media frenzy around 377 happened, and a lot of people started reporting, and you might have, even if you would have followed the entire thing from 2013 to 2018, you would have known for a fact that this famous quote by Justice Indu Malhotra, who is a Supreme Court judge, who said history owes an apology to LGBT persons and their families. I'm just paraphrasing the quote; it might be a little bit different, but this quote is very famous, right? But it came during the time of 37, this whole illegal battle around 377. But people forgot an important judgment, which was a Nalsa judgment. Now, Nalsa judgment is a mixed bag. Nalsa judgment, unlike the 377 related judgments in the Supreme Court, um, on the one hand talked of rights. On the other hand, the major part that the Supreme Court went wrong was in understanding gender identity. They did not understand sex and gender identity completely. So there you would find a lot of transphobic language in the judgment. But the judgment also was a reaffirmation of legal recognition of rights under the Constitution of India to a whole category of persons whose rights were not affirmed if they were to, move slightly away from what is legally given to them, based on their category. That is one. I'll come back to NALSA a little later. Now, a quick summary. There was a NAS judgment in 2009 in the Delhi High Court. Now, this is an these judgments related to 377 are important precisely because 377 carried with it a certain form of Victorian morality, just as sedition law and many other controversial laws do. We all know that for 200 years, colonialism heavily ruled us in multiple ways and still continues to probably rule us in other ways, just not the persons. So 377 till about 1990s, of course, you could not find much of cases, but you could always find that this provision, along with other provisions, was always used to threaten and harass queer and trans persons. Then there came NAS too, because people appealed in the Supreme Court, and you would often find that the one thing in India, it's kind of like funny because the only thing in India, the only rare moment in India where all religious groups, conservatives of all religious groups combined and came together and stood up for each other in solidarity and said, this is not in our culture, and we will not accept it. That was like the literal, I don't know, some kind of unity that I will never find in India ever again, probably. Which led to the Suresh Kumar Kaushal judgment. It was a very disappointing point, also, and also a testing time because the Supreme Court somehow said that the parliament should deal with it. And of course, given the ways in which our parliament functioned and still functions, we do not have much hope from the parliament, of course, especially on controversial issues like this, irrespective of what the personal politicians' views were. Then came the Navtej Singh and others versus Union of India judgment. Of course, Akshay Padmashali was the original petitioner. Then a lot of persons came in, and one of the things shifted was in NAS 1 and NAS 2, queer persons themselves were not petitioners. But in Navtej Singh Johar judgment, queer persons and trans persons themselves were petitioners who came forward, because being out is a big deal in India. It's still not acceptable. A lot of parents, families, society, social structures do not accept that, and you tend to lose a lot of legal rights around this. Now, why am I going through this? You might already know this, right? I mean, why am I going through all this, same old stuff that you are hearing? It's precisely to also, help educate persons who have no idea about this. And also, one more important point here is a certain kind of shift. Now, suddenly, after the Navtej judgment, everyone, trans persons and queer persons have become suddenly the hotcakes of the social sector. Everyone wants a piece of us, and that is kind of happening. And having said that, of course, if you look at the Aadhaar judgment and the privacy judgments, Putuswamy judgment, you will know some implications of privacy. But again, there are criticisms. One is, who is the one who is getting rights in our country? The respectable queer person, the respectable trans person. I mean, with regards to trans person, I don't see anyone respectable, quote unquote. But even then, respectable queer person, respectable trans person who fits into the middle class imagination of being this Savarna dominant caste person, who is educated or who is on the way to education, who is into the white collar professions and not professions which are not which are less respected in our country. That shift of who is considered worthy of rights, that is an important criticism that has happened of all these judgments. Now, coming to the important point around the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. Now, this is the main point of this session, and I'm so sorry for taking literally 20 minutes only to just come to this, but I wanted to give the ground here. The important point around this act is a literal, if you want to read and understand the shifting of understanding of gender by the government, this act is the study that you should be doing, actually. The act had various versions. It had versions into 2000. Basically, Nalsa judgment came in 2014. Then a lot of trans persons from Tamil Nadu and across India, through approached MPs, especially Trichy Shiva, and Trichy Shiva brought in a private member bill, which was very progressive, and it had almost like bi-party and all parties consensus in the Rajya Sabha. It passed in the Rajya Sabha. It was one of the first private member bill in about 35 years, probably. I may not be sure of the number, but it passed. And but in the Lok Sabha, when it came to the Lok Sabha, it did have some problems, but they were not major. And that bill was somehow stalled, and the government said, okay, this bill has a problem, we'll bring our own bill. And then came the 2016 bill. The 2016 bill was extremely horrible. The 2016 bill had a very wrong definition of transgender persons, and this started a certain kind of churn of trans persons coming forward and protesting against the proposed legislation, and asking for amendments, and it galvanized a lot of organizing in the communities and among individuals, and a certain kind of negotiation in a democracy between individuals and communities and the state, and with the certain kind of hold of the NGO sector also started happening. This kind of negotiation of rights also started happening in in a democratic setup. And 2008, the 2016 version was taken back, and 2018 version came, which was nothing more than a eyewash. It did not have any kind of significant rights. And then the 2019 version was passed. Ironically, on a day, on a controversial day, the Lok Sabha passed it. Then it was passed in Rajya Sabha also. But whether Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, if you notice, the discussion tended to be of very minimal. The debate tended to be very minimal, often not. And despite a lot of attempts by Teji Shiva to improve the bill, it did not get improved. And so the act was passed. And this act has a lot of problems, although the definition has improved. And in between these two three versions, there was also a parliamentary standing committee, and also a select. Before that, in 2013, there was a select committee. Both the reports, if you compare, the parliamentary standing committee's report was better, but the parliamentary standing committee's reports, recommendations themselves were not taken by the government, and the act was still passed. And the thing that they kept repeating was, this will all be rectified and sorted out in the rules. And there was a certain kind of rush in trying to pass the act. And the act, although has a better definition now, earlier, if you look at the objectives, I have the printouts of, in fact, all the versions. And if you look at the earlier the objectives of the act, it still says transgender community is one of the most marginalized communities in the country because they do not fit into the general categories of male or female. This is the understanding that was in the previous versions of the act, which also was part of the definition, which now has been moved only into the objectives, ironically, which doesn't actually correspond to the definition. It's kind of ironic, objective और definition में similarity नहीं है. मतलब objective कुछ और बोल रहा है और definition कुछ और बोल रहा है. And objectives generally tend to help you guide why is a legislation framed, and helps in interpretation, right? But if the objectives itself has a horrible definition like this, which says because they do not fit into the general categories of male or female, which completely obfuscates the fact that there are trans men and trans women in this country who will just call themselves man or woman and not call themselves as anything else. It just obfuscates that idea and only looks for the dominant, stereotype assumptions. Now let's come to some of the problematic provisions under the Act. The Act, in a certain way, limits the definition of family. In the definition clause of transgender person, it includes multiple categories. It includes an individual person, say a trans man or a trans woman. It includes social categories such as social categories, social identities such as Hijra, Kinnor, um, Arvani and Jokta. Now, I do not completely know how many of the persons from these social identities were consulted and their views taken on board for them to be included under the definition of a transgender person. The other problem also is that it also includes persons with intersex variations. Now, I'm not an intersex person, so I can't speak for them. I mean, if they want to be included, that's their complete choice and freedom. But the idea also is that if you're including persons with intersex variations under the definition of transgender persons, you must also give them substantive rights. If you look at the entire act, it does not even ban sex reassignment surgeries on intersex infants, which is a form of medicalized violence. So let's go back to the first part where I said, how do say doctors, when a child is born, classify someone into categories of sex, and that is only by looking at the genitalia, right? So someone's genitalia or chromosomes or hormones or sex characteristics do not necessarily fit into our idea of male or female. So then what happens to that child? What happens usually is that either the child is given away to the traditional communities, or the child is abandoned, are the parents and the doctor come together to perform forceful sex reassignment surgeries on the child. So there was a Madras High Court judgment called Arun Kumar and Shrija versus Registrar General of Tamil Nadu. I'm not completely sure of the citation, but that judgment of the Madras High Court single bench of Madurai uh, talked about two things. One, it also said that trans persons who fit within the binary will fit within the bride and bridegroom words under the Hindu Marriage Act, and since they can get married. Now, the other part was also an intervening petition by Gopi Shankar Madurai, and that petition's judgment was also that parents' assent is not equal to the child's consent, which essentially meant that you have to wait for the child to grow old enough to make the decision for themselves, unless and until the only exception is that the you can do the surgery only if the it can save the child's life. Otherwise, you have to let the child be, and the surgery that therefore is banned. But that's only the Madras High Court. It's since it's a High Court and not a Supreme Court, it's not applicable everywhere. So, and this act was passed much after the judgment, but this act does not even ban that. So that you see where the problem is. This act says protection of rights, but it does not actually end up protecting people's rights. It's only interested in giving a tokenistic, approach to rights. So it has an entire chapter on discrimination, but it does not define any penalties for discrimination. So imagine if someone, say me, is discriminated or someone else is discriminated, how are they going to enforce, that provision? How are they going to ask for any kind of penalty from the institution, any kind of compensation from the institution, whatever maybe that institution is? Um, the other part also is the most problematic part is the recognition of identity of transgender persons. So before the act was passed, what usually happened was a person, at least in Delhi, I mean, it varied from state to state, and a lot depended on the local government's discretion. A lot was arbitrary, but at least for Delhi, what was happening was you could go and apply for a name and a gender change in the Gazette office. You can, and before that, you needed to have a certificate for gender dysphoria, and and the psychiatrist or the psychologist will be giving you that certificate. On the basis of that, you can change your legal documents. You have to publish it in 2 newspaper ads, and based on that notification of the Gazette office, you can change your legal documents. But once the act is passed, what is now the new regime is that you can apply to the district magistrate, and the district magistrate will give you the identity of only a transgender person. They will not give you the identity of a male or a female. So by passing this act, you've already created a certain distinction between male, female, and transgender person. You've literally created anyway 3 categories. So in the case of a trans man or a trans woman, or in case of anyone else who doesn't want the transgender persons category, the only other way to get out of it and get a, say, a certificate of a male or a female is to go for sex reassignment surgery. The NASA judgment in certain portions very clearly says, okay, before going ahead, I have got a question. Is surgeries on intersex children banned under this act by Shreya? Okay, so surgeries on intersex children is not banned under this act. Nowhere in this, that's what I've been saying in till now, that while they've included persons with intersex variations under the definition of transgender persons, they have not given any kind of substantial rights to them apart from the already existing rights under the act. So no specific rights, such as the surgery is not banned. In short, the surgery is probably banned in Tamil Nadu because of the Madras High Court judgment, but it is not applicable because the Supreme Court has not given it. Nobody has appealed in the Supreme Court, and ideally the act should have banned it, but the act has not banned it. We have to look for the rules. If the rules bans it, then it's a different thing. But the idea is, see, also when there is something called a legislation and a subordinate legislation, right? Say the law and the rules. Why do you create a law when you can do all the major stuff in the rules? Why do you want to leave the main stuff in the rules, which is open to executive discretion and changing? So no, intersex children pays surgeries are not banned at the national level, unfortunately. And okay, Rajiv has a question, which is, can all legal documents be changed on the basis of gender dysphoria certificate? Okay, the one thing that you must understand is that now it's completely unclear on how they are going to process it once the act has been passed. Before the act, you needed a gender dysphoria certificate. Now, with the act has passed, probably they will still require a gender dysphoria certificate. But at what stage and for what and all that, we have to look for the rules. So yeah, coming back to the recognition problems, the recognition problem also came about with section 6 and 7, which mandates sex reassignment surgery. Now, why is that a problem? The problem is, just imagine, say for example, you have a grandmother or a grandfather. You're suddenly saying at the age of 60 or 70 or 50 that they should suddenly look at themselves and just judge themselves whether they're man or woman, and if they don't have a vagina or a penis, they should better get the surgery done. Now, if I say this way, it sounds very offensive, right? That is precisely how it sounds to say a transgender person in the community. A transgender person who is of 60, who is of 70 years, who is 50 years, cannot afford to go to a surgeon to get surgery only so that they will get legal recognition as a man or woman. How ridiculous is that assumption that anyone at that age will have to get up and get the surgery only so that, oh bhai, mujhe woman ka darja de do ya man ka darja de do. The other problem of this kind of recognition process is also this assumption that surgeries are universally available in India, which is not true. It's still available more in the private sector. Government sector has nothing. And the problem also is that somewhere down the line, medical industry tends to make trans persons into a lab rat where they can experiment on us. So that's why mandating surgery is going to only make that industry boom and not actually help people get the legal recognition that they want. And look at just the practical implications. So someone goes and gets the wants to be recognized as a male or a female. So if they start on their hormonal therapy after a certain few months, usually it's advised that you have to be on 2 years, for a minimum of 2 years, to have any kind of significant changes in your body. So in the 2 years, there's going to be significant changes in the way you look, in the way you present yourself, and during all that time, you will not be able to change your legal category. And the only legal category that you might be able to still change is to show that they are a transgender person. And let me remind you all that in India, there's a lot of stigma associated with the category of trans. There are a lot of spaces which are extremely binary. How is a trans person supposed to navigate that? And people who do not identify with that category, why should they have this intermediate step where you're creating a hierarchy? What the act is essentially saying is, if you want to identify as trans person, the only, if you have to do some effort, get up, go to the district magistrate, and they will give you the certificate. But if you want to identify or be recognized as a male or a female, you have to do a little bit more effort. You will have to, have that body part, and for that you have to go through the surgery. You have to get the certificate of the chief medical officer. You have to get the certificate of the district magistrate, and the act also says that and on being satisfied as to the correctness of that certificate, which essentially means the government has a huge amount of mistrust with chief medical officer certificates. I mean, people are not going to bungle you, or just take so much effort in their life just to be identified, right? And this has a grounding in the previous versions of the act, which were bills, which talked about district screening committee. Basically, a bunch of people who are not trans in the first place and who are third persons in the first place will sit and adjudge whether you're a man or a woman. I mean, no person will go through that humiliation, but this act's earlier versions actually said that. Because the idea is that they want to reinforce the binary. They want to feel the state, the government wants to feel safe that, oh my god, okay, if someone is identifying as a woman, they better have that part. If someone is identifying as a man, they better have that part. And the reality is that in case of trans men, the bottom surgery is can especially the ones which are available in India, is extremely dangerous. And the surgery is a major surgery, not a minor surgery. And the government simply does not understand that, right? That's the problem in this act. The realities, and the reality that not every transgender person will want to do all the surgeries. So when they mention sex reassignment surgery in the act, throughout the act, they have not defined sex reassignment surgery. So we don't exactly know what they mean by sex reassignment surgery. Do they mean just the bottom surgery? Do they mean just the top surgery? So someone who just has breast documentation, will that be enough? Someone who has that be enough? Are they are also mentioning other ancillary surgeries of the throat, of the face? What are they mentioning? What are they meaning by the surgery? The person who has drafted the act does not clearly understand transgender persons. And also, coming to the next, I mean, this has gone long enough, but there are many other problems in the act, including the fact that a national council is being constituted. Let me remind you, in this country, for women, there is something called National Commission for Women. For backward classes, National Commission for Backward Classes. But for transgender persons, it's National Council, not National Commission. And National Council may there will be only 5 transgender persons. The list of transgender persons there in the National Council are actually completely government officers, and the union minister will be heading it. So imagine the union minister for social justice will head the National Council, which will hold the social justice ministry accountable. How ridiculous does this sound? The minister will hold the ministry accountable by heading the National Council, which is supposed to scrutinize the ministry's actions and help further the rights of transgender persons. That's the I mean, you are the examiner of your exam. Basically, you are being given the question paper and बोल रहे हैं कि आप आंसर लिखो और फिर आंसर को खुद ही चेक करो. That's how the rights are going to work in this country. And the National Council will not be headed by a transgender person. It will be headed by a cisgender person. And the National Council will have 5 transgender persons. मतलब जहाँ पे हमारा rights होगा, where this rights-based framework will start institutionalizing, that council will also have a minority of transgender persons. जहाँ हमारा rights की बात होता है, वहाँ पे भी हम minority में हैं. So then why? I mean, is this like a piecemeal token that people are giving to us? And also this, there are other problems. The family is narrowly defined. So you do know that there are a lot of Hijra communities which have the Guru Chela Parampara, which have. So if you're a child or if you're an adult and if you are thrown out of the family, where do you have? Where would you go? You don't have friends. You don't have money. The only places you might go to is the police station or some government institution. But if they themselves are throwing you out, where will you go? You will only go to the nearby, say, the Hijra community, the social group. And they under this act, they are not under the definition of family. So they are trying to reinforce the cisgender norms of. Okay, so okay, it's not a stupid question at all. I've been wondering also what is the difference, Shreya. I've been also wondering about the difference between council and a commission. But as far as I know, looking at the history of national commissions, commission sounds a better one. Council is just like a, what you call a sabha. And the way the National Council has been framed, it's not a constitutional commission. It's not a constitutional body. It's just a statutory body where a bunch of people who are extremely busy will sit, and who, there is no time limit here. Just as there is no time limit for recognition. I mean, if you go and apply to the district magistrate, you just go back to the recognition process. There is no time limit. तो डिस्ट्रिक्ट मजिस्ट्रेट कितने दिन में आपका एप्लीकेशन को प्रोसेस करेगा? That is not there. In how many days or how many months is this application going to be processed? And if the district magistrate tells you no, they are saying you are not a transgender person, we will not give you this. Where are you going to go? Are you going to go to the court? Is every transgender person in this country so equipped to go to the court? I'm a law student, I can file a petition tomorrow. But how many people can go and file a petition to a court? And how many can have the wherewithal to just fight a court case? You know the reality of the judiciary and the enforcement system in this country. When transgender persons themselves are harassed a lot, how do you expect any, there was a time, if lawyers are watching this, of course, don't be embarrassed, but the idea is that there was a time when judges used to laugh at transgender persons. So, I mean, given that history and given that a lot has not perhaps changed, then how do you expect transgender persons to even get a basic such as recognition from law, say, to reaffirm who they are? So, difference between commission and council, maybe not much, but at least commission has more powers. Council, unfortunately, no. At least in this act's context. And also the problem here is that they are saying, in one part of the act, they're saying where any parent or a member of his immediate family is unable to take care of a transgender, the competent court shall by an order direct such person to be placed in a rehabilitation center. Now, why is that a problem? If anyone has read the constitution, there is something called the freedom of movement in residence. Basically, अगर आपको problem होता है family के साथ या किसी और के साथ जहाँ भी रह रहे हो, you have a right to go wherever you want, right? That's the constitutional right. But in transgender person's case, they are essentially taking away their right, and they're not making a distinction between child and adult. They are saying, irrespective of whether you're a child or an adult, the court will decide where you live. The court will decide where you live, and that better be in a rehabilitation center. And the reality of a rehabilitation center in this country is that, if you imagine the visual, a lot of rehabilitation centers, not every rehabilitation center, a lot of rehabilitation centers are in extreme dire straits. They are dens of exploitation. The persons there are not given any money, they are not given anything, and they are just given food and shelter, and it's like you're a bonded laborer there. It's like even in jail you have a provision for bail. In a rehabilitation center you have nothing. Even here they have not specified anything about, if you go into a rehabilitation center, say the court orders you to go into that, and you go in there, how are you going to come out? There is nothing. And how many rehabilitation centers in the country are trans inclusive? So this act is not essentially a good act, unfortunately, and it's worse than the three Chishivas, the private members bill. And the last part in the act that I want to come to is that this act, I don't know, the person who drafted the act has no understanding of criminal law also, because this act talks about sexual abuse of a transgender person, saying it will be from 6 months to 2 years. Okay, so Gautam's question. Hi, Gautam. Thanks for tuning in. And say, okay, is there a way you would frame the concept of chosen families in legal terms in the act? Well, to the question, I would say that yes, there are two ways to go about it. Either you would take away the existing advantage of the family, the cis het natal family, or the adoptive family. You take away the advantage in the law, but that is going to be that's not going to be possible, because you need kind of stability. You want to place the person somewhere. So then yes, but I don't know how. That can only come from consultations, which unfortunately the even the few amount of people who deposed before the parliamentary standing committee and whatever report came out, the recommendations have never made it, and there was no widespread consultations. So then how do we expect this definition to come about? I would Ideally, I would say that since you're including hijab persons and kinner persons and the social groups, social identities under the category of transgender persons, and not just individual identities, then ideally you should talk with them, their representatives, people from the communities, and you should find out a way to give recognition to that. Because already, if you look at property rights, there is probably one judgment from Himachal Pradesh High Court, as far as I remember, I might be wrong, which talks about property flowing from a hijab guru, to a chela. That was also because there was no contest. I mean, nobody contested that thing, and it passed on. Probably Sweetie versus general public. That was probably the case. So it's not like there is no difference that has been made between. I mean, there is no change that has happened between the cishet and the chosen family, because guru is not related to you by blood. It's not related by legal adoption. It's not related. It's not related by any other kind of marriage or any other social institution. It's only just a guru and a chela parampara, which has been, the property has, flowed, right? So that, yes, but I mean, the government should talk to traditional communities to see how the properties are flowing there. They should do a study. That has not happened. So then how do you expect this definition to come about? And also, okay, Shubh has given a question. So if I am a legal adult and a trans person, I want to leave my abusive house, will I be legally not allowed to do so? Well, you will be legally allowed to do so. It's not clear completely how you're going to approach the court. You might approach the court to the police or through some kind of local government institution or any kind of center, and the court will order you to be put in a rehabilitation center. That's what is going to happen. The act is like very clearly saying that you do not have any right to go and reside in the traditional hijra, social cultural communities, groups of hijra kinner, ironically, which have been included in the definition, under the definition of this act. Because if you look at the previous provision, it says that somewhere down the line, it also says that no child shall be separated from the parents or immediate family on the ground of being a transgender, except on the order of a competent court in the interest of such a child. So, which essentially means they are trying, while they are on the one hand placing these communities and groups under the identity category, on the other hand, they are also underhandedly, silently, they are taking away the traditional ways in which those communities have thrived, which is children who were abandoned by the parents, children who were thrown out, adults who were thrown out, went to the groups. Okay, so Aina's question has come. How should the rules of the Act be drafted to best circumvent all the shitty parts of that? That's a difficult question. In fact, Gautam will be able to better tell you. But if I, nobody can see, rules, subordinate legislation cannot completely overrule the main act. So although there is some discussion around the rules, and the ministry is trying to frame the rules, probably they've given it to some person, some institution, but the rules cannot override the recognition provisions. NALSA says there can be no medical basis for recognition of gender identity. I'm paraphrasing it. Of course, I'm not exactly quoting it, but how can you implement that in the recognition process, which says essentially that you will be given only the category of transgender person, and then you will be given the category of male or female if you go through the surgery? That is the essential dichotomy, right? How are you going to override that? And if rules are going to override a main act, please let me know how is sexual abuse going to be defined, because I was trying to talk about that only. In the entire IPC, you will find different words called sexual harassment. You'll find words called rape. You will not find words called sexual abuse. Probably you might find it in the DV Act. I've not read the DV Act honestly, but someone probably told me that. But sexual abuse ka definition kahan hai? So if you are a judge, how are you going to define sexual abuse? एंड रूल्स कैसे ओवरराइड करेगा? यहाँ पे 6 महीने से 2 साल लिखा हुआ है, which while sexual harassment of a cis woman in this country, cis woman basically legally a female in this country, is 3 years probably, and rape is 10 years. Earlier it was 7 years. It's 10 years to life or even death penalty. I mean, I don't want death penalty for, I mean, personally I don't want death penalty, but that is not here. And the social justice minister probably also told us that oh my god, in the parliament, that IPC covers transgender persons. Now you're legally creating 3 categories: male, female, transgender person. Please try and find me transgender person in the Indian penal code. There is nothing. Ironically, the only section, the 377, which was protecting us after the Navtej judgment, which said, I mean, non-consensual sex is still criminal under 377, which means, I mean, a certain specific form of rape. That will also may not protect us, because now legally there are 3 categories, right? Clearly, male, female, transgender persons. So 377 is not going to protect us. 377, unless and until you are legally a male or legally a female. And the moment you are stepping into the transgender person legal category, you may not get the protection of 377. So the only protection is 6 months to 2 years. And how are you going to override that with the rules? So okay, the question of what does the trans community have now to fight this? So there is 2 or probably more petitions that are being filed in the Supreme Court right now. The original petition is by Swati Bidan Barua, and they are challenging it on the grounds of being unconstitutional and all that. And but the problem is, certain things we don't know. Certain things are beyond the threshold of constitutionality. Certain things are simply a negotiation of trying to fight for rights. And the other ways is, of course, rules. You have to fight and get better rules under the act. You have to try and challenge the constitutionality of the act. You have to try and fight with the states to get better rules, or some kind of other acts for those specific jurisdictions, which will help us better. So for example, things that are under them, health, education, in that, because there is no reservation in this act. There is no reservation for education institutions and jobs, while the Nalsa judgment specifically said transgender persons will be under reservation under the OBC category, which was a wrong classification, of course. We should have been given horizontal reservation. Where can possibly National Council lead us? Ironically, one more problem of the National Council is that this act never mentions state councils. This act has nothing about state councils. So you are establishing a national council with no corresponding institution under the state governments. So then what are state governments supposed to do? There were few 6-7 states which established transgender welfare boards, which brought out some transgender persons welfare policies. And now all that is in limbo. We don't know how that is going to pan out under this act, because how is a welfare board similar to a council, and how are they going to work together? And even if it's asymmetric, you can still work with each other. Why are you not establishing parallel institutions in the state government? So in this entire act, to summarize, since we are almost going to finish 1 hour, the entire act is about putting the mandate of and controlling transgender persons. I mean, law has a certain way of controlling us, which is like fine, but there is no accountability of the state and its institutions towards the transgender persons. So district magistrate ka accountability nahi hai. District magistrate is not accountable to us. The judge is not accountable to us. And police officer is not accountable to us. The medical industry is not accountable to us. All these people, all these 4 institutions, medical industry, the judiciary, the police, and the district magistrate, they have somehow been given power over our lives. So standing in court saying that I am a woman is not enough. Standing in court, giving a gazette notification saying I am a woman is not enough. You will have to have Now all these people certifying you at different levels, and only then you are going to get something. So you are not any more evidence for yourself, and that's horrifying, right? You are not, if you read if you think of evidence law, you are not any more evidence for yourself. You cannot stand in court and be give testimony for yourself. Your testimony doesn't matter to law. What matters to law is all these four people who the state trusts to enforce the binary in various ways, to whom the power goes. And we are not saying don't, and there can't be no bureaucratization. There will be bureaucratization of recognition process and other things. But where is their accountability to us? What can we do where the power will be given back to us? That's the idea of a welfare state, right? But that's not happening. This is not a rights-based framework of act. Since we are going to almost get over this, okay, quickly I'll just cover this and I'll finish off, which is gender-based segregation in public spaces. All the public spaces that you talk about, universities, public spheres, say the Delhi Metro, you talk about even the court, for example, you talk about law campuses, you talk about enough spaces. I'll give you an example. For a long time, courtrooms did not have female washrooms. So there are had one female washroom and multiple male washrooms. The assumption was the woman did not need washrooms, even if she were to be a lawyer. So there were ways around which women were kept out of kept out of coming to a court. There are so many high courts which had a history like that. That's the way in which transgender persons are also kept out. So there is no gender neutral washrooms. Security lines are more like security lines in Delhi Metro, in airports, and passport offices. They are just like spaces where you are more, the sexualized object. You suddenly you make people realize that there is something called gender. Until then, everybody is comfortably in their own gender binaries, and they don't have to think about it. Suddenly, when you are in visibly, you are in their thing, then you are reminding them. And these gender-based segregation, for example, hostels. If transgender persons, I mean, if they get admission in your university, say male, female, others, what are they going to do? Which competitions are they going to participate in? All competitions, right, from freshers to the end of farewell, freshers to farewell, everything is binary: male, female, male, female, male, female, Mr. Fresher, Miss Fresher, best female advocate, best female advocate. And specific attire also. I mean, that's in Bar Council of India's rules, that a man should be wearing these kapda and this woman should be wearing this kapda. So a woman who cannot wear a shirt and a sari, that combination cannot ever happen. These kind of stupid ideas are still there. So it has not trickled in, and it has not happened. And the segregation affects us. So transgender persons, if they are to go to say competitions outside a university, where they're going to reside? आपका सबका hostels तो male और female में है. So they have to negotiate and they have to make compromises with themselves, and not the university will not make any space for including them. And that's how gender-based segregation works. So that's essentially how people have been kept out. I'm sorry, I quickly covered this. Okay, so this Rasika's question of under Indian law, has there been no mention of identities such as non-binary or gender non-conforming so far? We have been mentioned. It's not like transgender persons are not subject of law. We are the subject of law. Look at Immoral Trafficking Act, Immoral Trafficking ITPA basically. You look at Criminal Tribes Act. I mean, it may not specifically have the words that you are mentioning of non-binary or gender non-conforming, but we are the subject of laws. We are not subject of laws, but there is no law that is ensuring rights to us. That's the problem. And also, I mean, you're talking about Indian law. Talk about the books and the little act ka gender language. No, everywhere, his and he means she. His automatically means she. He means she. So I mean, look at all your textbooks, look at all your Indian law references. You will know for a fact that he means she. So then let that be reversed. No, let them place she instead of he. How will men who are looking at Indian laws, who are looking at barracks, cis men, and looking at that, how will they feel? Would they feel included? Will they feel nice? Oh my god, everywhere it's she, yaar, come on. How is it I'm a he, she kyun hai har jagah? So Indian law has always been gendered. So this idea that, I mean, if you were to take the metaphor of the uh, the statue of justice, and this blindfold that is put on her, while she's holding the weight, actually she's not, she is seeing you very clearly. The statue of justice and law is seeing you very clearly. So this idea that it is not gendered and is not seeing you is not there. It's completely gendered. And so gender non-binary or gender non-conforming is not terms that we have found in law. And also please realize these are words in English. These are very modern terms. Many of our laws, like say Epidemic Diseases Act in times of COVID, is British time का act. So imagine उस time पे gender non-conforming, non-binary तो होगा ही नहीं. It's simply not possible for laws to have these terms, precisely because these are terms that they never understood. At a time women did not have rights, then how do you expect them to even think of us? That's kind of understanding they'll never think. Okay, this is the last slide I want to leave with before I end this session, which is a set of things that I want you all to, some must reads that I want you all to leave with. Which must watch, must listen to is, and I'll read them out. One is A Life in Trans Activism by A. Revati. One is I Am Vidya by Living Smile Vidya. The first one is my most cherished, book. I love that book, and you all should read that book. It's feminist. It's intersectional. It's subtly put, makes you understand so many things, and it's in both in Tamil and in English. It's written by A. Revati, a trans woman herself, and it's translated into English. Then there is a critique of the Nalsa judgment by G. Mansamala. You all, I mean, if everyone is celebrating the Nalsa judgment, please also read the critique, because the Nalsa judgment has many transphobic ideas also, such as becoming a woman. When you're not becoming a woman, your gender identity is not something to become someday. You are who you are. You are a woman if you say you are a woman. If you are a man, if you say you are a man. You don't become a woman. You don't become a man. You might use legal, social, and medical, technologies and contexts and structures to reaffirm who you are in a certain context. That's it. Then there is a chapter. This, you can just Google this chapter, Transphobia as Brahminism. There's a conversation between G. Man Semaler and Living Smile Vidya. It's a eye opener on caste and gender, and you all must read it. And there's a YouTube channel which I want you all to subscribe since you're watching me, which is Transvision. And Grace Banu and Vajanti Vasanta Mowgli's talks, and Bittu's presentation, because a lot of people talk about science, so, and hardly actually understand science. So I want you all to also listen to Bittu's presentation, and Anbu's piece on decriminalization and category-wise rights, because it talks of certain things that we don't talk about. We all want to talk about respectable queer politics, and it doesn't talk. It criticizes and critiques that politics, and that understanding of rights. And also a very important resource is Sampurna and Orinam's website. And last one that I want you all to read, if you want to better understand what I spoke for nearly an hour, is Vikramaditya Sahay's piece on consent in the Trans Act, because that's an important framework. Because the entire Transgender Persons Act actually does not have anything from the framework of consent. It doesn't have anything. It's completely like the state is saying, we know what is best for you, and we will do it. That's it. Just like everyone else, treats us that way, right from schools to colleges, that they will say, we know what is best for you, right? So we will do. They will not be like, okay, what do you want? Please tell us. We'll help. That's not what is happening here. So that's what the act also reflects. And I would like to end with that. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any further questions, you can always reach out to me. And I hope this was informative. There are many other, parts of this act, and other things that are problematic and wrong. But I'll not be able to cover this just in 1 hour. And I hope this situation gets better regarding COVID, and we resume our normal lives. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much today for joining us today. If anyone has any more questions, you can ask them in the comments for the next 5 minutes, or feel free to reach out to us over email. I hope that all of you are doing well and will be able to attend the rest of this series over the course of this month. We're going to invite speakers from a diverse collection of backgrounds to make this conversation about trans identities more intersectional. And please follow our Instagram page for more details. Thank you.